All right, so we've heard about the new registration rule for aliens, for undocumented immigrants. So I want to talk to you today about what you need to know. So first, let me set this scene. Imagine waking up to a knock on the door, or perhaps a knock on your car window, and it's immigration officers or even federal enforcement officers like the FBI or other federal officers, and they're demanding to see your registration papers. You don't have them because you didn't even know you needed them, but suddenly you're now facing potential criminal charges. This sounds like something from history, from a time when people had to produce their papers or they had to wear different things on their sleeves to identify who they were. I think we know what that history is, but it is not from the history books. It's actually now all over again. And what this is as of April 11th, 2025, a new rule is going to require certain non-citizens to register, and if they don't, they could face criminal or civil penalties. So today I'm going to break down what this new alien registration rule is, how it impacts you, and what you can do to protect yourself. Now, if you're undocumented or you have an expired visa, this is an episode that you're going to want to listen to, mostly because it could give you some peace of mind on one hand, and it could kind of freak you out on the other hand. So what my goal is here is to give you peace of mind, because knowledge is power. So why does this, when we start from the alien registration rule from a broad policy perspective, why does it matter? It matters because for decades, being in the U.S. without status was simply a civil violation, something you could get fined for, but it wasn't a criminal offense. But under this new rule, failing to register or failing to change your address can now lead to serious criminal prosecution. I'm talking about looking up to 6 months in jail. There's also the possibility of fines. So even worse than this is that the Trump administration, has openly admitted that the rule's purpose is to basically trap undocumented immigrants, where the Trump administration is saying they're trying to scare you into registering. Once you register, they know where you live. When they know where you live, they're going to go apprehend you and deport you. When we think about what does this rule actually say, who does this apply to, and what can we do to avoid becoming a target? Let's start with step one. Who must register? So on his first day in office, President Trump signed this executive order, and part of it has this section on identification for unregistered aliens and some of the different things in here. And we see that it comes from a specific section in the immigration laws, and I'm going to show you what those are. There are several sections, but this is kind of where all of this began, was through this executive order. And then we see soon after that, USCIS has put out on their website that pursuant to this executive order and pursuant to this statute, we're going to make sure that you comply with this, and it explains who it applies to. And if you prefer to see this in another language, there's other languages that are available, and you can read this in those languages. I prefer English. Okay, so it says who this applies to, but you'll notice there's no information. Usually when we go to the bottom, there's forms. What we're probably going to see is a website that's created, and then they're going to ask you to come in for fingerprinting. Once they fingerprint you, you're just basically, in my opinion, going to be put on a list for removal, and it will just be a matter of time until you're apprehended, sent a letter to come in and be apprehended, or you're going to get that knock on the door or the knock on your car window, because they're going to want to apprehend you and deport you. So this is the immigration side of things. So this is where the president is issuing his statement. This is where immigration is beginning to enforce it. And then this is the statutory basis. It's in 8 U.S.C. 1302. And this is the basis that shows us where the executive order, what it's enforcing, because obviously Trump can make lots of executive orders, but he can't create criminal punishment, but it's actually already in the statute. And this statute is from like the 1940s. So it's very old, and it actually came from a very dark time in our history. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I just want you to see kind of where things are coming. This section on, the fingerprints and everything else. And then down here, we get into how you're supposed to change your address. And then section 1306 is where we actually get into what the penalties are. Knowing that that's our basis, let's start. All right, knowing that that's our basis. Sorry, I need a little edit there. knowing that that's our basis, let's start with who needs to register. The statute says that all non-citizens who are 14 and older who are in the U.S. for more than 30 days need to register and be fingerprinted within that time frame. So number one, I just think that's impossible. USCIS has never issued a single one of my clients a receipt notice and an appointment to go be fingerprinted within 30 days of anything. So I think that this is practically impossible, and that's going to be a problem for USCIS. Rather, it's going to be a problem for the federal government enforcing this because they're just not efficient like that. You're also, as a parent and guardian, you need to register your children under 14. So if you're over 14, you are responsible for registering yourself. Isn't that crazy? You're responsible for, and I'm laughing because it's just like, I don't even know how to respond anymore, but it's not because it's funny. If you're 14 and older, you're supposed to register yourself. If you have kids under 14 or you're the guardian for kids under 14, then you're supposed to register them if you're planning to be here for more than 30 days within 30 days. So here's the deal. You're probably already registered. Many, many people are already considered registered. And those people are folks who already have a green card. So basically, like, I really want to clarify, this statute and these penalties don't apply to you in terms of like the initial registration process if you are one of these people. So you already have your green card. If you were granted parole under a certain scenario, so you were paroled into the United States, if you were admitted, you were allowed to come in on a tourist visa or a work visa or something like that, even if it has since expired. So it's okay. Like, I'm talking about a border crossing card from 1992. You came in on that and then you never left. You're already registered. So the initial registration aspect won't apply to you. I do have concerns about the updating your address portion applying to you. Okay, so people who were or are in removal proceedings, even if like you had an Obama era administrative closure case, like 2012, 2015, you got administrative closure, you still need to update your address under the statute for registration purposes. So you're already registered, you're already in their system, they just want your current address. Again, all of this is designed because they want to deport you, right? But you have to think, like, if I'm a lawful permanent resident, I'm protected. If I'm here as a tourist, like I'm already registered, and I'm going to be here. I'm going to use the address that I provided them when I got to the border, all of that good stuff. Okay, so if you were granted employment authorization ever, even if it's now expired, you're already registered. If you're a refugee, so you have either been granted asylum, so you're a refugee, or you're seeking asylum. You are considered seeking asylum as a refugee and you're already registered. So if you've applied for permanent residency, you're already registered, even if your application was later denied. And that's kind of true across the board for the most part. If you've applied for benefits and they've since been denied, so you applied for a U visa, I would say that you've probably registered, obviously, and you've also been fingerprinted because you applied for that U visa, even if it was later denied. Again, this goes back to what about the updating the address piece of the statute? And that's what makes things very complicated. And then if you entered as a crewman, like you were on a ship or you were a pilot for a foreign country and you entered as a pilot on one of those visas, a crewman visa, you are also already considered as registered. So that covers a ton of people. Like a ton of people who are already registered. So this is really this is targeting people who are very, very undocumented. In fact, like people give me a hard time sometimes about saying, well, people who have papers aren't really undocumented. They might be unlawfully present, but they're not undocumented. And people are like, oh, lawyers are so annoying. And sometimes that can be true. I recognize that. But words matter, right? So in this situation, these are all folks who are perhaps out of status. They don't have status anymore, but they were or are documented. So the government has documents on you. So if you're thinking, I can't really tell if this applies to me or not, my question for you would be, have you ever had an A number? Have you ever been given an A number? This is an alien registration number. Have you ever been given a number like that? when you entered the country, did you enter lawfully? Did someone lawfully let you in the country and stamps, or did they look at your border crossing card? Those are the types of things that I would say you have already registered. Now, obviously, this is not legal advice. I'm not your lawyer. I'm just kind of describing this out loud for you. If you've ever been in removal proceedings, you're going to have an A number. So some of this is helpful because an A number is an alien registration number. So it means you have, in fact, registered. Okay, step 2. When we think about what are the consequences of not registering, and really what that comes down to is this question. Can failing to register or can failing to update my address result in me getting deported? And the answer is maybe. I mean, the answer is yes, but it's unlikely. So that's why I say maybe. Here's the deal. The law says that you can be deported if you don't register or if you don't move in time. Let me see if I can pull that up for you. I want to show you where it talks about this. Here we go. Okay, so this is the whole section. It talks about, it's 8 U.S.C. section 1227. It's all about deportable aliens. Sorry, I don't know. We really need to update this. But anyway, we go down. Here's all these different people who are removable. They are likely to be deportable. And down here we have failure to register or falsification of documents. And this is specific. This first one is specific to if you don't update your address. Sorry, this one is for if you don't update your address right here through registration, you can be deportable if such a failure was not reasonably excusable or it was willful. So if it was reasonably excusable and it wasn't willful, like you didn't do it on purpose, then that's basically like your argument. If you get put into removal proceedings, that would be your argument, that you would say, I have a really good excuse, or I didn't do this on purpose. I didn't know, or I tried to do this and it didn't work out. Those would be arguments that you could make. And then this section is talking about just not registering to begin with. This is the change of address section, and this is the failure to register in general. Okay, so where do we go from here? When we think, the law says I can be deported if I don't register or, I don't update my address. I don't have a good reason for not doing that. But in reality, this just isn't going to be the reason. This isn't going to be the main reason someone gets put into removal proceedings. Most likely, it's going to be people who are already undocumented. They've never had an alien registration, never registered. They're unlawfully present. That's the most common reason, you were not admitted or paroled and you're unlawfully here. That's what every single time I have clients who are unlawfully in the United States, that's the basis for their removal. They're not going to mess around with creating this. This has already existed. And in my 13 years, never once has this been a basis for removability. And that's because there are exceptions to this rule. You can argue that, hey, I have a really good excuse, or this wasn't willful. Where if you're unlawfully present and you can't prove that you are lawfully here, then that's a much easier case for the government to win. So I really don't think that this is going to become the basis for people putting you into removal proceedings. But instead, this is going to be the basis of scaring people into turning themselves in. That's really all this was designed for, or that's really all this statute is being used for. What it was designed for is another era. But what it's being used for now, or what will be used for in April, when this really goes into effect, is just to scare people into registering themselves. So it's easy for ICE to find you and easy for ICE to deport you. That's that. So the Trump administration has made it very clear that they want to go after you criminally and civilly. It's not just fines that they're going after. In fact, Attorney General Pam Bondi even instructed the Department of Justice, this was in February of this year, Pam Bondi instructed the Department of Justice to prosecute people who don't register, meaning that something that was always just a civil violation can now result in jail time. And what I really worry about, and if you're a criminal defense attorney, this is a really important thing for you, is you're not eligible. Let's say that you've got John Smith, who is here in the United States. He's been here for 25 years, entered illegally, no criminal history, nothing, but he doesn't register. He has kids. Let's see, he's got a wife, He's got 3 kids. One of them's 5, 9, and 12. Okay? All U.S. citizens. The wife is a lawful permanent resident. For whatever reason, he has never got any other petition for him. He has no alien registration number. He has no A number. He gets caught having not registered. This is his only criminal violation. There's nothing else that they can pin him for. My concern is that this statute allows up to 6 months of jail time. So if you're a criminal defense attorney, do not plead to 6 months of jail time, because then you become, the client later in immigration proceedings will become statutory ineligible for 42B cancellation of removal. So we really have to think through this, where you're like, is 6 months, like, yes, that's the maximum sentence, but at least he's also not going to be prosecuted for illegal entry or something like that. Maybe that's part of their threat. Do your very best to try not to have someone in jail for 180 days, because that can make them statutorily ineligible for 42B cancellation of removal, which would be a prime option for this client, assuming that his spouse or his children would experience extreme and unusual hardship if he were removed. But we don't want to cut him off from that form of relief by pleading him to, or allowing him to get the maximum sentence. I would go to trial on that. I would really, really fight that 6-month sentence, because otherwise he's going to be screwed when he gets to immigration court and only has asylum as his only option. So that is like a little nugget from a please, please, please. Criminal defense attorneys, be aware of this, because that's a really big deal for us over in immigration court. Okay. Now, non-citizens who are 18 and older, this is bonkers. This is truly, truly bonkers. Non-citizens 18 and older will be required to carry proof of registration at all times. This is so, I don't want to say it because I don't want YouTube to shadow ban me for talking about this, but this is so the little guy with the little mustache era stuff. That's very, very troubling. In fact, this is when this statute arose, was during that same time frame. So anyway, while the law doesn't explicitly require people to show these papers to law enforcement on demand, this could still lead to racial profiling and wrongful arrests, especially in communities already being targeted by law enforcement. So you just go to a church that has a lot of predominantly undocumented Hispanics and start asking for this. And if you can't provide it, you can be arrested on the spot, because you're required under the law to provide proof of registration or evidence that you have registered. So what would that be? Like pulling up your U.S.CIS account and showing that you registered? I do know that I would carry your receipt notice with you. If you have a case filed, I would carry your receipt notice with you in your wallet, so you at least have that to show that you have registered, because that is proof of registration, of having an A number. Okay, so what do we do now? That's the big question for everybody. And among immigration attorneys, it's really split on what folks think that we should or shouldn't do. I'm not personally planning to register anybody, because I think that this is just a big trap. And so as an immigration lawyer, I'm telling clients, these are the consequences if you don't register, but this is how you do it, and then you should go from there. But I'm not personally going to register anybody for it. I am going to encourage people, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but I'm going to encourage people to find options, even if it means filing for late asylum, as long as you have a credible fear that you're sincerely afraid of going back to your country. We're not going to abuse the asylum process, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. But number one is check if you're already registered. If you're thinking, what do I do now? Number one is figure out, am I already registered? So if you fall into the categories that I mentioned earlier, you likely don't need to do anything. If you have moved, however, after you initially got your A number, you may need to file a change of address, but that doesn't mean you need to go in and get your fingerprints and go through this whole process all over again, which is very, very scary in my opinion, because they can identify who's coming in for fingerprints for registration. You may need to update your address. Again, that's something that you have to decide whether you're going to do it for your registration to be current and for you not to be in violation of this statute. Now, if you haven't registered, if you have not registered, this is for people who are totally undocumented. I really recommend that you talk to a lawyer before you do it. I'm not saying don't follow the law. I'm saying talk to a lawyer so you can understand the consequences of what you're about to do. And the reason for this is I really believe, and it is a stated goal, like no one's hiding behind this, is registration is going to put you on ICE's radar and you are going to be a priority for removal. So you need to have a strategy first. You need to have a plan first, because once you ring this bell, you can't unring it. It's done. So if you need to register and you haven't, here are a few options for you that you may want to consider. Again, I already mentioned asylum. Specific to my Mexican listeners, Trump just designated the cartels in Mexico as a terror group. He just did that. And so that is a major change in country conditions, that if you're now afraid to go back to Mexico because you don't want to be hassled or have to give financial help to a terror group, which is what you would have to do if you want them to leave you alone, that would be a very strong basis for an I-589 for an asylum application with U.S.CIS. That's something that I would definitely, whether you call my office or whether you call your local attorney's office, I would really look into that. And I would not mess around with working with I refer a lot of people to notarios. I believe that notarios and form preparers can do a lot of really great work. This is not one of those situations. You want someone who went to law school and someone whose license is on the line based on what information they tell you. Because if you get bad advice here, you could really find yourself sitting in, number one, sitting in jail for 6 months and then being deported. It's a lot of risk. So don't budget shop on jail time. You know what I mean? So in any event, if you possibly have a VAWA case, if you have a T visa case, U visa case, whatever it might be, I would consider filing for that as your form of registration rather than simply doing the registration process. Because remember, there are many ways you can satisfy this statute and not get into trouble. And one of those is filing for a form of relief. And so if you qualify for it, even if you have a lower chance of success, like a lot of times we let clients know, hey, you have a 50-50 shot. Do you still want to file? And they're like, oh, I don't really know. Well, if on the other hand, you can file and have a 50-50 shot, or you can register and know you're going to be deported, which option do you want to take? I think you're going to want to take your 50-50 shot at getting this form of relief, which could actually lead you to a green card, which is pretty cool. So if you're undocumented and you don't qualify for a relief, again, I would talk to an immigration lawyer to understand the risks and best steps, because that is going to be something that's really important for you to be aware of and to make a very informed decision about. If you're unsure of whether you need to register, you need to call a lawyer today. Because when this goes into effect, today's March 11th, 1 month from now, basis for ICE and all these other folks who are apprehending people, they're going to have a whole other ground of being able to pull you over. They're going to be able to have a whole other reason for being able to racially profile you. And they're already violating the law in so many different ways. This is just going to give them a whole other cloak of protection. And that's pretty messed up. So I would definitely take proactive steps. And the other piece is you need to stay informed. This rule is new. The law is not new, but 13 years practicing immigration law. I think it's actually 14 years now. I've lost count. But anyway, this rule's new. It's never really been enforced. Trump talked about it in his first administration, talked about using it, but never got around to it. And he came out the gate with it on January 20th. So you need to keep up with updates. We're going to learn more as we go along. And I have some predictions for you at the end here that I want to share with you. So here are my hot takes, as I would like to call them. These are my predictions. Number one, I think this rule is going to get hit with lawsuits immediately. The Trump administration skipped the 45-day public comment period for creating this rule, which makes it kind of weak under the Administration Procedure Act. So I foresee that courts may step in and block enforcement, especially because racial profiling is likely going to be a major issue, big time. So I predict that there's going to be some litigation on this. Whether it is able to survive that litigation or not, only time will tell. But what I predict is that the ACLU or another nonprofit like that will file a federal lawsuit in a state that is very friendly toward immigrants, or is, typically going to have more liberal judges than conservative judges. They're not going to be filing it in Texas or in Louisiana, for example. They're going to file like in Vermont, or you know what? I don't even know why I said Vermont. They're going to file it probably in California or someplace like that. But Vermont might be a good option. New York State might be a really good option because they've already had harm from a lot of racial profiling from ICE already, even before this rule is taking place. So I predict it's going to be in one of those types of states, and then we'll see how it plays out. But if it does get tied up in legal battles, it may still be in effect. So you need to be prepared one way or the other. And my thought is, hey, if you apply for asylum or if you qualify for asylum or any other form of relief, get the process started now. That way, by the time we file everything, you get your receipt notice and you have proof of your registration. I would not wait for the government or a court to change its mind, because this is like, we're already staring down the barrel of a lot of very dangerous things. And remember, scare tactics only work if we let them. When you stay informed and you take action, they talk about how taking action is how you get rid of fear. And if I just do something, that I'm not going to be as scared, then that is the step to take. And that will prevent them from winning. They want you to pack up and go home and leave behind this life that you built and you fought tooth and nail for. You have worked your butt off to be able to have the life that you have today. And so my hope is that although this rule is complex and the stakes are really high, I hope that today's helpful for you in figuring out whether you should register and what the best legal strategy is. And my thought is, you guys just talk to an immigration lawyer right away and see if you qualify for something, because that would really be the very best option for you, is for you to register or to file for something to get your alien registration number. My friends, that's all for today. Thank you so much. Please subscribe to my channel, to my show, and share this episode with your community. And above all, please stay informed. Your future in the U.S. depends on it. I'll see you soon, my friends.